morning, everyone. My name is Charlie Lewis. I'm an associate partner at McKinsey & Company, where I lead our cyber transformation service line globally. And I spend a lot of time working with organizations and thinking about how they can address their cyber risk, more specifically, thinking about how to reduce it, how to communicate it to boards, and really how to make an impact in a way that allows them to spend the most money most effectively for cyber risk reduction. I've been at McKinsey for about 5 years. Prior to that, I spent 14 years in the US Army, the last bit of it as a cyber operations officer. But I'm the moderator and I'm the last person you want to hear from, so we'll pass it on down to Gwen.
Hi, good morning. I'm Gwen Williamson, and I'm a partner in the investment management practice at Perkins Coie, which is a law firm. My clients are primarily financial institutions, mutual funds, investment advisors, players in the asset management space, and you might wonder why I'm on this panel. Then I have done an enormous amount of work from a governance perspective with boards of directors and management persons within large financial institutions on cybersecurity, risk management, and reporting and oversight. For at least the past 12 years, we've been quite focused on that. So that's a big part of my practice, and I am glad to be here with you all today. I've been practicing for just about 20 years. I am happy to report.
Hi, everyone. I'm Arvind Parthasarathy. I'm the founder and CEO of Cygnus. We are a software company based in Silicon Valley, and we serve the insurance industry. Our customers are insurers and brokers who are rolling the platform out to policyholders to help them better prepare for a cyber incident, to better practice the cyber incident, and then, of course, unfortunately, if it does happen to them, to be able to respond to a cyber incident. And part of the value proposition here is that the policyholders, they get the playbooks and the best practices that they may have assembled themselves, but then also across the insurance industry, with the number of claims that are going through and the best practices being established, being able to take those playbooks and what works and what doesn't work and be able to institute that to the actual policyholders.
Super. Christian Hoffman, lead cyber globally for Aon. When we think about cyber, it includes both our insurance brokerage team, global insurance brokerage team for cyber, as well as we've got a cyber consulting business. We acquired a company, Strauss Freeburg, back in 2016. So, ultimately, we can help clients through sort of our integrated solution set think about how to mature their risk, mitigate their cyber risk on the front end through our advisory practice, our testing practice, threat intelligence, clearly work them through the insurance transaction, thinking about quantification, and ultimately actually, placing a program for them, and have 125-person digital forensics and incident response team to support our client base, when an incident occurs. And so we're the only company with that breadth of solution set on the consulting and the insurance brokerage side, and really trying to work through that integrated story. And we'll talk about stakeholders, but again, helping the various stakeholders within organizations get aligned on this massive topic of cyber.
Excellent, thank you all. And just so you all sort of understand the flow of the conversation, we'll start a little bit on what the board's responsibility is and the role of the board with cybersecurity, and then work our way all the way through the various topics that they may face, the stakeholder management, the reporting requirements, and then have a little bit of time on the cyber insurance market and the future of that, and then open it up to all of you for questions. So we look forward to this conversation. But Gwen, would love to start with you, and really, what is the role of the board when it comes to managing cyber risk and cybersecurity?
Right. Well, the role of the board in general, of course, is one of oversight, right? And the board has fiduciary duties. Those are going to vary in detail depending on the nature of the business. And I point that out because in financial services, the institutions have things that are among the most that matter to human beings, right? Your personally identifiable information and your money. So the financial services industry is sort of ahead of the curve, I would say, in the development of its cyber security programs, both internally within companies and the board's oversight of that. So I will tell you, with one of my clients about 10 years ago, we set forth on the journey that we've been on for a good while now, and started with education. We got the management of the company, its IT staff, its chief information security officer, all of these folks to come and report to the board in some specialized meetings called for that purpose. These are what these terms mean. These are what, these are the vendors that we use. These are the applications on our employees' desktops, you know, all of that to sort of set the playing field. This is what we're talking about. And then you know, we as lawyers helped the board understand what standards were out there. You know, what are the reference points for the development of a hardy cybersecurity program for a financial institution, and the NIST, the National Institute for Security and Technology?
That's National Institute of Science and Technology.
Okay.
It's Cybersecurity Framework.
Yes.
Yes, the CSF.
Right. So, thank you, Charlie. So, you know, that was one such reference point. The SEC, in various informal guidance, has at that point had suggested other reference points, and so we worked with the management of the company to develop an initial education and reporting program to the board that helped the board over the course of really about a year and a half decide what, from its fiduciary perspective, it thought were the most salient aspects of the program. What were the risks presented to shareholders, for example. Once that was established, we worked with management to develop an annual and quarterly and interim sort of, you know, emergency incident type like reporting system, right? And so these days it shows up, we have the Chief Information Security Officer come once a year. Quarterly, we have the head of IT for asset management comes quarterly. And if anything is happens on an interim basis, we have, for example, the chief operating officer or a delegate will call the chair of the board. So like when the SolarWinds incident happened, my COO called the chair of the board, said we had this come up, and here is how it impacted us. They were properly prepared, and they had to do some calculations manually for a couple of days, but there was no problem there. And I will note that a big part of that was because a huge component of the overall cybersecurity program that this client of mine has is its vendor risk management program. And in the asset management industry, to develop that, it started with mapping the flow of the data, because what you're talking about there is information flow. And what we wound up doing was requiring all vendors through to all endpoints in that flow to either have policies and procedures of their own that were commensurate with my clients, or to just adopt the clients. We developed a template for them. So that's a pretty forwardly developed program, but I think particularly with the SEC's new rule proposal that came out in March for public companies on cybersecurity reporting, that they're pushing public companies anyway to sort of follow up that kind of model, I think.
No, it's great. I actually chuckle because that last part, you know, you're talking about an asset management company, but this cybersecurity framework actually begins with asset management as well, and understanding where the data flows, because that is sort of the ground truth of what you need to secure, what you need to protect. And until you know, and I think from an insurance standpoint, that's what matters. That's your infrastructure, that's your housing, that's your people that you have to protect, but it's really hard to understand where that is. Christian, you had mentioned something in your introduction around stakeholders and bringing the different stakeholders together. When you're meeting with companies in leadership, what type of stakeholders do you see? What are some of the best practices in terms of the interactions and relationships, but also what are some of the pain points?
Yeah, no, you know, when we think about stakeholders, it gets broad, right? Board of directors is one, obviously security and technology, who are working to you know, protect the firm. Risk management, clearly, who's involved from you know, if enterprise determines to acquire insurance, but then you have sort of operations. You talked about, you know, COO, operations, legal, clearly because of all the regulatory requirements, you know, clearly HR in terms of training. So, you know, when I think about just going back to the initial question around board of directors, right, it's got to be a top-down approach from the board and C-suite on this topic of cyber. You know, I was talking to one of our senior leaders, and this individual always likes to ask the question when he's sitting across the table from another senior leader, a CEO, you know, who owns cyber within your organization? And he's like, I sit there, and you could see sort of the, you know, the I don't know, the clock ticking, or sort of in their head trying to think, who actually owns cyber? And he goes, that you do, right? You own it, because there is this sort of stakeholder. What is a bit of a challenge, sort of aligning everybody. You know, we talked. You know, we saw. You know, years ago. It's not today. You know, we'd walk into underwriting meetings, right? And you know, you're presenting for cyber insurance, the chief information security officer, somebody senior in the security space. You've got risk management sitting at the table. You may have general counsel at the table also. But the meetings never started off well when the risk manager and the CISO were introducing themselves to each other for the first time, right? We've come a long way since then. We've come very much a long way. Some of the more challenging insurance market that we've gone through on the cyber front over the last 18 months, call it, has brought, frankly, a lot more stakeholder alignment, which, you know, again, is critical when the board of directors thinks about it for their enterprise, how the C-suite thinks about it. You know, clearly it's top of mind now. You know, SEC has guidance out around, you know, what expertise that needs to be on board of directors. New York Department of Financial Services has their own guidance. So this continues to get raised up. And again, to really have, you know, a mature organization around cybersecurity, and how you want to think about whether it's investments in cybersecurity, investments in the insurance component, which all needs to be a part of that broader dialogue. You have to have, you know, you ultimately have to have that stakeholder alignment, and then just that's sort of the front end of things. Take that to the, you know, the response side, and if you haven't, you know, developed that alignment and who's moving on the day of the game, which is, you know, again, you know, we watch these cyber incidents occur, and you know, clients that have, you know, built, you know, a robust plan around incident response, alignment across stakeholders, have tabletopped or, you know, sort of navigated through a simulation. You see it's night and day in terms of how that plays out. So, you know, again, we talk a lot about this stakeholder challenge and work to bring, you know, the teams together, because whether it's on the front end, sort of working through an insurance placement, when there's an incident, it always proves a lot more successful if you've got stakeholders aligned.
I love that point on the incident response and the preparation. We had talked a little bit about preparation prior and getting everything ready through your platform and what you've seen with successful companies. Can you talk a bit about that and how they get ready before an incident, and then what the best actions are actually during an incident?
Yeah, no, thanks. And I think to echo Christian's point, I think being able to prepare for an incident is probably the single most important thing a company can do to actually ensure that the incident, you know, is as minimal as possible, is least disruptive as possible, and does not involve any bad things happening to the board or the organization. And it is, while it is such a simple thing to plan for, it is a lot of organizations oftentimes don't know where to start. And to Gwen's point, I think the large enterprises have huge teams around all of this, but when you start to get into the small businesses as well as the mid-market, there is a lot of uncertainty. People don't know where to start. Is planning for an incident an admission that you're going to have an incident? Not necessarily, of course not, right? It's about foresight about what could happen. And the point around stakeholders is oftentimes it's not just within the organization. You've also got stakeholders outside the organization. I mean, like a forensic firm that Christian's running, or a legal firm, you know, anybody who's in an incident is going to involve outside counsel. You're going to, sometimes multiple outside counsel if you've got different jurisdictions involved. You will have forensic firms, you will have credit monitoring firms, you might have call centers, and of course the insurance industry, right? Both the broker as well as the insurance provider, and the entire ecosystem is going to be there to support that policyholder. And I think it's about when you tabletop or you simulate, it's working through all of that. It's being able to come up with an incident response plan, and this is where having default playbooks helps. In fact, you can actually get standard examples of what's a starting point for a retailer or a healthcare company, which actually gives you a lot of the tasks to be performed, the facts to be gathered, the people to be involved, and instantiating that and then simulating that in an environment where not just internal but external stakeholders can work together will increase that muscle memory of the organization, which, again, if it does happen, then people are not figuring it out for the very first time. And I think that ability is really what reduces, an incident from being 10x the impact, because it is now managed, it's controlled. And of course, whether it's the regulator or anybody, I think we all know that there's probably no amount of money that can totally prevent or guarantee that somebody never has an incident. So if you can never do that, then the best thing to do is actually to prepare for it and practice it, such that if it does happen, you're going to be in a very good place to respond.
Can we keep talking a little bit on the preparing and practicing? Because we have mentioned the SEC, and previously we were talking about CERCIA. So there's new guidance that's coming out from the federal government on reporting requirements. And so some of the states and some of the larger regulatory responses are 72 hours or a little bit longer from identification. So that would be GDPR in Europe, and some of the previous requirements of the state-by-state reporting requirements. And each state has different reporting requirements and different numbers of folks to report, and then therefore there are also different penalties from there. But the SEC and CISA, so the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is part of DHS, just came out with new guidance that everyone's waiting on. But we had talked about that. You talk about the importance of rehearsing now that there's faster reporting requirements, more data sharing, and then how you think that could potentially change the market.
Yeah, no, and I think part of the great point there is the fact that as the government and the regulators are putting in more requirements, it is just not physically possible for an average policyholder to keep track of everything that's going on and be able to know exactly what to do when. And that's where I think the insurance industry has played a great role, because for a policyholder on a Monday morning, if they have an incident, it might be the first time they're having it in 3 years or N years. Whereas for that insurer or that broker, that might be the 10th call that morning that's actually happening. So the fact that there is a large number of these incidents across different geographies, across different compliance regimes, allows insurers and brokers to actually create those playbooks. So that way, through a platform, you can actually report and say, oh, well, these are the information that needs to go to that regulator, and this is the pieces of information that goes to that regulator. Oh, and by the way, you don't have to send this bit to this regulator. And knowing what to send to whom and to be able to do it in an organized fashion becomes sort of the knowledge that we see the insurers and brokers having. And instantiating it in a platform to be able to do that so that way the policyholder is benefiting from, unfortunately, all the people before them that had the incident, and then the insurance industry has sort of built that collective memory on.
Thank you. Christian, we had talked, in speaking of that, so there's the regulatory risk, but we had also talked about sort of systemic or horizontal risk, and that cyber can be sort of one of these wicked problems or novel crises that can be cross-cutting, so SolarWinds, Log4j. So if you want to know when major cyber incidents happen, just think about what you're getting ready to do before the holiday season, and just know that a major cyber incident is going to hit most of your customers, and then therefore they're going to be working over the holidays. But can we talk a little bit about how you're viewing sort of systemic risk and how various stakeholders in your organization, specifically the incident responders, think about the vendors and think about that connective point and the connective tissue in the cyber landscape?
Yeah, and it's it's the whole, it's the market, the sort of cyber, as you say, ecosystem, thinking about systemic risk right now. And if you just dial it into, the insurance space, insurers are thinking about, each and every one of them thinking about systemic risk from, what if a large cloud provider, significant cloud provider goes down? How does that ripple through, enterprises, big, small, medium size? There are, networks and support systems for individual industries that can create systemic risk. So, we're constantly thinking about, and talking to, again, our cybersecurity experts internally, our insurance experts, talking with the marketplace on how we frankly, our sort of colleagues internally that are connected to government, in thinking how we're going to address this, big topic of systemic risk. We've talked a lot about, war and war exclusions within the context of the cyber insurance policy, infrastructure language that's out there. And so these are massive topics that we're thinking about, talking about. Some insurers have made, specific moves on how they're tackling that risk within their portfolio. But that it hasn't sort of played out to the finish line yet. I think there's a lot of dialogue, and do we get to a point, government's always sort of, peeking in, trying to figure out, do they need to support some of the challenges that can be created from, these systemic risk issues. There are industry groups, the ISACs that are all thinking about these on a specific industry basis. When we think about, again, industry-specific systemic risk versus some of the bigger ones around infrastructure, thinking about the internet itself, thinking about cloud. We're not at the end of the game yet. There's still a lot of dialogue on how we want to get there. But we ultimately have to get to a point that, if the market collectively, especially on the insurance side, thinks about systemic risks and wants to, exclude or manage a portion of that, where does it ultimately fall, right? And so just take a cloud provider. Is there some form of, hours or days that they're down, that the market wants to sort of cap at it? Well, where does that systemic risk go after that? And then, to the point on industry, we've got to collectively work with industry from again, sort of these industry cyber groups in thinking about their various challenges. And again, bringing in, when we talk about stakeholders and third parties and stakeholders within those individual companies coming together to sit at the table to address those various risks, whether it's around, actually getting to the security up front or thinking about how to, transfer that risk appropriately in the marketplace.
The one question we had talked about previously was around litigation and how boards are thinking about the litigation, especially when it comes to cyber. So can you provide some examples or cases where you've seen that discussion take place and what some of the concerns were?
Sure. Well, I mean, the SolarWinds case is a good one, right? Because it survived a motion to dismiss, which many of the cases that had previously been brought against boards of directors for losses arising from cyber attacks had not survived that hurdle of a motion to dismiss. And I think, what boards are thinking about is that they are concerned, right? What does this mean for me? And so then we need to think about D&O insurance, right? D&O insurance has the very specific purpose of shielding directors and officers, right, from personal liability associated with serving in those roles. It's an incentive to, help them want to serve in these important roles. And you guys are much more expert on insurance than I am, but what I am telling all of my board clients and what my colleagues in my corporate and securities practice group, where they represent public companies much more than I do, is that you're sort of right to be concerned. Let's take this as an opportunity to, if we have not yet started down the journey of developing a robust cybersecurity oversight program, let's do that now. Let's also take opportunity to really dig into what our insurance coverage is. D&O insurance, some, as you all know, might include cyber-related matters. Others might carve it out. I think some boards need education on insurance generally, first and third party insurance in the cyber context. What does that mean? I had a trustee who asked every meeting for about 3 years about the reputational risk associated with cybersecurity for the business, and where did that fall in the insurance coverage that we had, obtained. And that's a first party coverage issue until it becomes a loss in value for shareholders, and then that's more like a third party risk, right? So all of it goes to what is your business? What are your specific types of risk there? Do you need first and third party? Do you need a mix of the two? Or cybersecurity insurance just for one specific part of your business even? That's sort of what we're working with boards these days, is to get their arms around the risk exposure for their business, both in terms of, what are the specific cyber risks to this business. It's different if you're selling shoes than if you're, a healthcare company, right? What are our risks? What are the controls in place to mitigate those risks, to protect all of our stakeholders? If we are a regulated, an SEC-regulated entity, what controls do we have around our disclosure in this regard? And then what's our insurance coverage? So one of my colleagues put it that, the SEC's rule proposal, which we can talk a little bit more if you like, but was sort of a wake-up call for boards. Someone else I know put it as that boards are sort of sitting ducks if they haven't done this sort of due diligence to set up their oversight structure, so to speak. And if the management itself of the company has not done the work to set up the underlying program, everybody's at risk there.
So Charlie, if I could add to that, I think a lot of the points that Glenn made around risks are very important, especially in this audience. But with cyber, you also have the other issue of the threat. And that has really nothing to do in some sense sometimes, or could be completely orthogonal to the risk. So for instance, you could have two companies of the exact same industry, exact same size, but let's say the CEO of one company goes off and makes a public statement about how their company is invulnerable to cyber attacks. I almost guarantee you that their risk is much higher than the other company that just said nothing about it. So the issue here is a lot of insurance engagement is about risk identification, but here there is a threat aspect to it. So even the question around TRIA, I mean, one of the big questions is going to be, if an organization did have an incident, how do you know who actually did it? The attribution of who that party is. Was it a terrorist organization? Was it a known terrorist organization? Was it a state actor? Was it an offshoot of a state actor with quasi-terrorist potential? Was it a crime syndicate that took the technology from a state actor and then are now in business for themselves, right? I mean, the spectrum is fairly wide, and unless you actually have the ability to attribute who it came from, then the threat in some sense is sort of very misplaced in terms of what the risk could be. And that's where I think some of the other challenges with TRIA and so forth have to be thought through.
No, I think that's a really, Christian.
I was going to go back to some of the stuff Gwen was talking about.
Yeah, let's go.
So just on the directors and officers front, right? Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's valid. But it's funny that, to your point on the SEC guidance, that it's a wake-up call. You'd think, sort of going back even to the 2014, 2015 with Target and Home Depot, and since then you've seen sort of every industry have significant challenge, that those would have been wake-up calls. I think about even NotPetya in 2017, there were a number of large organizations that had billions of dollars of loss from cyber events stemming from NotPetya. And if any board of director or CEO or whomever got on the earnings calls for those companies, they addressed this cyber event like as the first item of business on those. And a lot of them was sort of the end of the second quarter, so it was top of mind. But the first thing they did on their equity earnings call was talk about their cyber event that occurred and what they were doing and how the company was faring and things like that. You'd think some of those would have been wake-up calls before the sort of SEC coming down on this. But, I mean, we've seen, directors and officers litigation for both direct shareholder action, derivative actions, over the course of, again, sort of dating back 2014, 2015. Again, some have been egregious, and we've seen settlements, but not a ton. I'd want to say like less than 10 maybe have sort of settled. But there have been others that have actually provided good roadmap of rigor in the boardroom around, okay, well, they were investing in people, they were investing in technology and security, they had bought an insurance policy, right? The board, could prove, right, and ultimately C-suite can prove sort of all the work they had done to mitigate this risk, and it's not, even all those things and all those investments aren't foolproof. So I think that sort of sets the stage for some of it. But then the only other, other sort of wrinkle to this, when you think about personal liability or directors and officers liability, just last week there was a guilty verdict for the CISO of Uber, and it wasn't necessarily around the event. It was around sort of work with the FTC and sort of this specific individual's disclosure to the FTC. And again, found guilty, and has liability that we've never seen before from an information security leader. So that's adding a whole new complexity to this dialogue when we think about directors and officers liability and the insurance itself, as well as the landscape.
Well, I really like the point that you made about standards being set by the courts, so to speak. The SEC proposal that is out there for public companies on cybersecurity generally, it's a disclosure-based proposal. That is generally how the SEC regulates. It says, tell us what your cybersecurity policy is, and if you don't have one, why, right? So that makes everybody have one. And I think that ideally, that if the rules are adopted in some form as proposed, that the standards set by the courts and the standards set by the SEC should eventually give comfort to public companies that they, if you are meeting that sort of baseline standard, your liability is generally lessened. And now there's sort of the problem of what is that baseline standard? It doesn't exactly exist. And some of the criticism I know at the SEC proposal is that it doesn't use terms and standards and stuff consistently enough, and it introduces ambiguity. And how do we comply with this? I think folks would like to say, all right, please tell us what to do. We're happy to set it up and then move forward.
Well, I think we've seen that from our client standpoint. It does vary when you thought about GDPR coming out. What was the control framework to be able to potentially reduce the risk that would come there if something were to happen? Because again, as you said, the threat, it's very difficult to control the threat. And for those of you who don't typically understand or don't spend a lot of your time in the threat market, right? It's the exact same thing as any underground market. There are shopping centers where you can go, you can outsource your various activity that you want to do. You can take what was used elsewhere and apply it to a different vendor, and it's all on the dark web, and it just is the highest bidder is able to pay from there. But I want to open up one sort of last question to all of you, and then go to everyone in the room. But sort of given what we've talked about, the concerns around the threat, the various different requirements, what may or may not be coming out in terms of standards, what is the future of the cyber insurance market? How does it grow? And it's probably better to start with you, Christian, and we'll sort of work our way this way. But what is the future of the cybersecurity market, and how should those in the audience think about it, and how should customers and those you're insuring think about it?
Yeah. So, sort of the market was moving along, through 2020, while all this, ransomware events clearly were significantly rising, right? And so you look at, as we moved into the beginning of 2021, really, the market became challenging, right, for buyers of insurance, and frankly for the insurance community working to figure out how do we sort of get our arms around the losses, how do we really start to think about the underwriting and what's required of companies to provide them insurance. And so, listen, there was a lot of tough medicine, right, from a loss perspective, from a buyer perspective, and again, from a process perspective, through that, call it 2021 being, truly challenging with rates rising, capacity shrinking, retentions coming up. Again, really focus on underwriting rigor. But I do believe our industry you know, stood out, right, in terms of, you know, companies had to get more resilient, had to, you know, mitigate this risk. And again, through a challenging market, yes, but helped, you know, ultimately companies decided to make investments in people and technology and tools and insurance and ultimately to get better. And that's, you know, what the insurance industry does a lot of the time. So again, a lot of tough medicine delivered, but hopefully we've, with around, you know, the underwriting rigor, sort of getting to a better level of insurance and pricing and capacity deployment, I think we've ultimately created hopefully a more stable product over time, and hopefully we don't see the large swings that, you know, collectively the broader P&C market will see in hardening trends and softening trends and things of that nature. Hopefully we create a little bit more of a stability baseline, which will, you know, give us, you know, a longer term view of this, of supporting this risk, supporting clients on this risk. I think our collective challenge, though, is, you know, with the noise of, you know, rising premiums, less capacity, you know, discussing war exclusions and infrastructure and systemic risk and how the market is going to address those things, and do we, you know, take it away? Do we sort of narrow it? You know, how does that shape up? Capacity coming down, you know, buyers needed to take more risk on. Obviously, again, the underwriting rigor that goes into it. Do you have MFA across your organization? Do you have an incident response plan, endpoint detection and response, right? The list is massive that, you know, the insurance community is looking for to write a risk. We do have to figure out a way to continue to entice new buyers, right? We can't sort of level off at this, you know, this sort of level that we're at today. You know, we haven't lost a lot, which is good. You know, there's some noise here or there about, you know, certain organizations moving into their captive. They may be supported by the reinsurance market, so it's still within the insurance context. In Europe, a group of sort of led by French risk managers have decided to sort of put together a mutual around cyber. It's got sort of a long-term view, starting with some co-insurance in programs to creating a primary product. So you've got these little things with captives and you know, mutuals springing up. Haven't gotten to sort of the ILS market, right? I don't think there's enough data for that market to get their arms around it to date, but it's a big topic. But we have to continue to figure out how to, you know, bring buyers into the risk transfer world, and hopefully, again, what we've established, you know, through the course of 2021 and into 2022 is this sort of rising tide of risk and you know, companies getting better around cybersecurity to create this more sustainable long-term environment. And we know it's happened, you know, at the enterprise level. Various industries, we've talked about financial and services, always been at the leader. You know, there are others maybe, you know, more, you know, with operational risk, operational technology and operational risk, right, that may, you know, we've got to continue to help, you know, enhance and mitigate and mature their security platforms. And then it also goes down segment from there, and how do we, you know, collectively think about, you know, tools, technology, support, services, to again, you know, connect with the middle market and small companies who don't have the resources of large enterprise, and give them the ability to hopefully get security uplift, but also then, you know, for that balance sheet and volatility protection, are able to transfer their risk in the marketplace. So I think we've created some stability. Again, there's a lot more to play out around language and things like that that the market needs to address, but you know, we collectively need to think how to continue to bring new buyers into our space.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about the cyber insurance policy is it's often a black box, right? Like you write the insurance policy and then you spend a full year with very little visibility on either side between the insurance industry and the client. And this kind of information asymmetry is not the sort of the way to get to a very sustainable market, right? For the insurance industry to be able to deploy more and more capacity, they need more visibility and more information. And for the buyers to also feel comfortable giving up all of that information because it's their core network, it's their core, you know, information. I mean, what if it got into the wrong hands? So the way I think about it is we've got to break that black box. And a lot of insurance is, you know, you write the policy and then you wait a year to bind at the time of renewal. And during that 1 year, there's very little interaction. between the policyholder and the insurance company. And I think, our philosophy is that it needs to be a collaboration. The binding of the cyber insurance policy is not the end of the process. It's actually the beginning of that collaboration. And over the next 1 year, as events are happening in the marketplace or on the threat landscape, the insurance industry and the brokers are, because they have the resources, are able to see this at an aggregate, are able to deliver information to the policyholder, and vice versa, which is the policyholder has unique aspects of what's going on with them, changes in their environment, changes in their systems, changes in how their risk profiles are. I mean, I always like to give the example that you could be a catering company and your risk profile is very, very slow. Is very, very low. But let's say you get the contract for an intelligence agency's catering. Suddenly your risk profile has just gotten ridiculously high. And the thing is that these are developments that are happening at the policyholder level that you can't wait till the next year renewal cycle. And that's why I feel like we've got to break that black box and have a collaboration environment where the policyholder can share, the vendors and all the third parties, maybe their network provider, their systems provider, their outside counsel, the policyholder is able to engage with the insurance industry, and vice versa. The insurance industry is able to engage with the policyholder. And that kind of collaboration in a secure way, I think, is sort of the way to unlock the information asymmetry and therefore unlock capacity, as well as buyers to get more excited about coming into this marketplace.
Just to add, I agree there needs to be sort of that more collaboration between sort of policy period. I think that the good news is there is still enhancement and maturity going on, right? So, during the underwriting process, not only are the underwriters, right, looking at a point in time of what security looks like, but clearly part of that dialogue is also sort of what does the roadmap look like, for the next year, 2, 5 years down the line. And, interestingly, they know, the security risk, those involved in the insurance transaction know that they have to install that privileged access management tool or get MFA across the organization. They've told them that's part of the roadmap. They've told the underwriting community, broker, that's part of the roadmap, and they know they have to fulfill that. So I agree, and it would be great to talk about that through and collaborate on that, post sort of renewal. The good news is there is change happening, and because of sort of the transaction and what they've laid out, to the underwriter, and we've seen, and with the information security teams more involved again over the course of the last 18 months in the insurance transaction. What the underwriting community is looking for and what the security leadership wants to do in terms of enhancing and mitigating on cybersecurity, for the most part aligns 90%, right? But there's some things there, and maybe it's different priorities, and information security leaders have said, oh, okay, I might have to reprioritize a little, in this next year because of where the insurance focus is. So I think, again, that goes back to that collaboration, understanding of what everybody's looking for in a more, a broader market, and goes back to the sort of stakeholder piece, all coming together.
Well, so from the board's perspective, I'd like to highlight 2 points. About 8 years ago now, we wrote an article about the apportionment of liability for cybersecurity risks within the asset management industry. And at that time, it was not clear to us whether cybersecurity risk was really going to be covered by the insurers that service the asset management industry, mutual funds and their boards in particular. And so we wrote this very sort of impassioned article about which players in the mutual fund scheme should bear the cost of either insurance, should it be available, or the other losses. So it seems that things have evolved now, right? And cybersecurity insurance is available to directors and officers. I think that I will just, on their behalf, say that I think that is a good thing, and it provides them the security that they need to be incented to serve in these roles, right? Like CEOs of big public companies, their salaries are what incent them there, and directors aren't typically compensated in that way, right? So it's just important that they have access to this insurance. And then the second point I'd like to note is I will pop in the ESG, right? So cybersecurity most clearly falls within the G, governance, and so ESG investing, if you don't No, is environmentally, socially, and governance-focused investing. It can take all sorts of slants, but that is the general gist. And so cybersecurity goes to a company's overall ESG score, primarily in the governance bucket. But take the example of, for example, a financial services company that is involved in mining Bitcoin, right? That starts involving the E, because those Bitcoin farms they generate a lot of heat, they use a lot of energy, and it involves the S to the extent, for example, I've read about one in the mountains of West Virginia that has basically destroyed the rural way of life for these people that have lived there forever, right? So cybersecurity and cyber-related operations, to the extent that digital assets still continue to become sort of a normal thing within our society, that's just a good example, I think, of how cybersecurity can really go to all three components of ESG, which is both a business and regulatory topic that keeps on giving.
That's great, and thank you, because I didn't get to those questions on there.